Today we work our way to today we work our way through chapter 16, where we find that some very obvious problems arise in our text. One, the Ten Commandments had not yet been given, but the children of Israel got in trouble for breaking the law of the Shabbat, to be specific. Number two, Aharon, that's Aaron if you don't know, was told to place the man, or as we know it, manna, in an earthen vessel in the tabernacle, but the order had not yet been given to build one, a tabernacle. And three, why would people complain about not having food when chapter 12 told us that they left Mitzrayim with flocks and herds and much cattle? Or Moshe announced things in verse 8, which God did not tell him until verses 11 and 12. Not to worry, though. I think we may actually find some solutions to some very old dilemmas along our journey, which begins with Shemot, or Exodus 16, chapter 16, verse 1. My translation of the Hebrew goes very much like this. And they journeyed from Elim, and they came to the Adat. That's the congregations. Wait a minute. And they, wow, I'm just making it up now. Let's try to read what I wrote. And they journeyed from Elim, and they came, comma, all the Adat, all of the congregations of the children of Israel, to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. Sinai, you hear it? On the 15th day of the second new moon, after they came out from the land of Mitzrayim. That's, of course, Egypt. Verse 2. And all the Adat, all the congregations of the children of Israel, dwelt on Moshe and Aharon in the wilderness. They dwelt on them? Well, that's a Hebrew idiom. They dwelt on them. They complained to them. We would say all the people rode their backs. That's the way we say it. Even Ezra said that at Morah, only part of the people murmured, while here all the people murmured. Casuto rightly pointed out that the use of the word all was hyperbolic. Those who had livestock certainly would have no reason to complain about the lack of food. And Moshe and Aharon certainly did not sit around complaining to each other about each other. I'm just saying. Verse 3. And the children of Israel said to them, oh, that we had died by the hand of Yahweh in the land of Mitzrayim, when we dwelt by the flesh pots eating bread to satisfaction. For you have made us to go out to this wilderness to make all this assembly dead with hunger. Yasudo said that people tend to forget past hardships when faced with new ones. He also said that to make all this assembly dead with hunger was a bit of an exaggeration. Again, why would the people with animals be dying with hunger? I'm just saying. Rashi took the verse to mean that the people had consumed all the animals they left with. And so I say, wow, when and where did they cook and eat all that meat? Well, I'm just saying. Now, verse 4 is very strange if you read it literally. It says, and Yahweh said to Moshe, behold, I rain down bread to you from the skies, and the people will go out word day in day, so that I will test them if they will walk in my Torah or not. Right? So it's strange. Rashi translated Velaktu devar yom beyomo. Literally, it means, and gather it word day in day it. He translated that as day's portion every day, and explained that it means that they were to gather every day food needed for that day and no more. It should be obvious from the reading that we are looking at one or more idioms. Your first clue is that it makes no sense. That's your first clue. It may not exactly be an idiom, but it'll be something along those lines. But first, here we have word day. What's a word day? Well, what it is, it's to declare an amount for a day. In this case, it's going to turn out to be an omer, right? So word day means amount. Second, it's in day it. So that's each day or that day. Thus, verse 4 should be rendered, and Yahweh said to Moshe, Behold, I will rain down bread to you from the skies, and the people will go out and gather the declared amount each day, so that I will test them, if they will walk in my Torah or not. Make a little more sense? Of course it does. Now the phrase, if they will walk in my Torah or not, to that Rashi limited the scope of God's law here to nothing more than the gathering of manna. Obviously, because the full Torah had not yet been given. God had only given this law about the manna, right? So he says, see, this law in this case is just about manna. Well, but I think that God probably just maybe somehow knew that the full Torah would eventually be given when he made this statement, and thus was probably speaking about the whole thing. But if the children of Israel could not follow just one law, as Rashi sees it, how did God ever expect them to follow 613? Well, some would say that God gave the children of Israel a law that could not be followed. But that is exactly like some people would say, the devil made me do it. You can't blame me. God gave me a law. Nobody can live up to that law. The devil made me do it. Not only that, it would make God sadistic. Further, it would mean that something that was not perfect, pure, and holy escaped the lips of God. That's what you're really saying when you say that a law was given that no man could live by. And if words escape God's lips that are not pure, that are not holy, that are not perfect, then the Torah is imperfect, impure, and unholy. You're going to have to decide it's one or the other. Verse 5. And it will be in the 6th day, they will prepare that which they brought in, and it will be twice as much as that which they gather. Days, of course. Gather days is gather daily. Day in, day out, day after day. You get it? Daily. Rashi thought that they would gather a single omer on Friday morning, and it would magically turn into two, so they would have enough on Saturday. No, this is simply a command to gather twice as much on Friday mornings. That's all it is. Verse 6, And Moshe and Aharon said to all the Adat, to all the congregations of the children of Israel, In the evening you will know that Yahweh made you go out from the land of Mitzrayim. Okay. It's possible that they walked through the hundreds of thousands or millions of people that were there and personally said this to every one of them, thus all the congregations, or that they stood up in some place with a megaphone and a PA system and everybody heard them, or they said it to the elders and the elders passed it on. It doesn't make any difference how it happened. All of the congregations, which does not mean all of the people in them, but all of the congregations were told. Just because you didn't show up to the meeting doesn't mean that all of the congregations were not told. I'm just saying. This is the way Hebrew works. All right. What he's saying here is, you knew that Yahweh was the God that brought you out of the land of Egypt when he drowned Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea. You knew it then, but obviously you'd forgotten. But tonight, you will be reminded. Not that you'll forget it tomorrow, but tonight you'll be reminded. Rashi and Rashbam said that this verse shows us that the children of Israel falsely declared that Moshe and Aharon had led them out of Mitzrayim in verse 3, because he's given that task to God. Verse 7, of course, how does he explain when God says tells Moshe that he led these people? Anyway, verse 7, and in the morning you will see the glory of Yahweh, in that he has heard your complaining against Yahweh and us. Who are we that you dwelt on us? Remember this, that you complained to us. So the phrase in the morning you will see the glory of Yahweh. Now, to that, Rashbam said that the glory of God was the manna falling from the sky. Rashi said the glory of God was the way in which God placed the manna. Kasuto said it wasn't that they would know God in that evening and see his glory the next morning, but rather in accordance with one of the idiomatic usages of biblical parallelism, they would know both day and night that God brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim. They would come to know this day and night. In other words, they wouldn't forget it. It's an idiom. And both day and night, they would see the glory of God. Not that day and that night, but that day and night they would see it, because this is what they call a parallelism. It's what they call an idiom. It's what I call an idiom. You see what's going on here? It's the way it's written is telling you that you're going to know it day and night. But then the other phrase, who are we, right? Rashi rendered the nachnu ma ki ta linu alenu. And said that very carefully so that you caught what I wanted you to catch. Literally, it says, and we who? For you caused to murmur them upon us. Or, put in a better way, of what importance are we that you induce everyone among you to murmur against us? So what Rashi did was change the spelling of the word so that it was causative. Already then. I don't see any problem with it per se, but I wouldn't do that. I'm not going to change something that is not causative to something that is causative. Because in a sense, he's trying to put blame over here and absolve the other people. Okay. Verse 8. And Moshe said, Yahweh will give you flesh in the evening and bread in the morning to eat to your satisfaction. For Yahweh has heard your complaints, which you have lodged against him, and here we go again. Who are we? For your complaints are not against us, but against Yahweh. So the first thing I want to tackle, the first phrase, flesh in the evening and bread in the morning to eat to your satisfaction. There are some strange arguments about people not needing to eat meat from this verse, but I think we may have solved the problem of obesity in America. It's called the bread in the morning and meat at night diet. Anyone want to try it? Kasuto explains the grammar rule of Remez, hinting back is what that means. He explains it as follows. When there is repetition, such as, and we're going to have a saying number one, blah, 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 and saying number two is in reference to the same subject, only the first saying introduces the actual words spoken, whereas the second saying merely eludes the inner purport of these words. Is that clear as mud? It is a nerdy way to explain that often Jews will give details in a saying. Then they will only say a few of the words from that saying later, which is called remez, or hinting back, because they know their listeners are familiar with the subject matter and do not feel the need to repeat the entire saying. For example, let me give you an example that I just made up. Saying number one. I can do anything I put my heart and soul and mind to if God allows such things. Saying number two. I was successful in my task because God allows such things. He allows such things is obviously the hinting back to the previous. Thus, he was successful in his task because he put his heart, soul, and mind into it, as God allows this sort of thing. Could you imagine how big the Bible would be if the Jews had written every detail every time? Back to Kasuto, who pointed out that even though Moshe was not told what was given, what would be given, or when until verses 11 and 12, he knew what and when, since he knew that God was going to answer their prayers, which was for bread, which was a morning event in their world, and meat, which was an evening event. Compare the meat part to Pesach meat, which is eaten when? At night. And then the phrase, who are we? Well, your complaints are not against us, but against Yahweh. Moshe is adding emphasis. This is not something separate or different or a new bullet point. It's emphasis to the idea that the people are complaining against Yahweh, not Moshe and Aharon. Even though they're backbiting against these two men, very much saying it's Moshe and Aharon, and they're even saying it to their faces. Moshe is pushing this, the emphasis here to say, you're not doing this against us. You're doing this against God. Because if you badmouth your rabbi, you're badmouthing your God. That's what he's saying. Verse 9, and Moshe said to Aharon, say to all the Adat, to all the congregations of the children of Israel, come to faces Yahweh, for he has heard your complaints. So it's come before, come into the presence of Yahweh, for he has heard your complaints. How would you like to have to stand before God after he's heard your complaints? That's sad. Rashi said they were to come near the cloud. Even Ezra said they were to come near the wilderness. Weren't they already near the cloud in the wilderness? I'm just saying. The text says that they were to come before or in the presence of Yahweh. So he's put the emphasis on what you're doing, complaining to us and about us, you're doing to God. Now it's time to come into the presence of God. Verse 10, and it came to pass, as Aharon made declaration, that all the Adat, all the congregations of the children of Israel turned to the wilderness, and behold, they saw the glory of Yahweh in a cloud. The meaning of this verse is made clear in chapter 24, verses 15 through 17. And here's some excerpts from that. The cloud covered the mountain. The glory of Yahweh dwelt on Sinai, and the cloud covered it. The glory of Yahweh was like a consuming fire. So you don't get it in this chapter and verse, or anywhere in this chapter, but if you read the rest of the story, then you'll have the rest of the story. Verse 11. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, verse 12, I have heard the complaining of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, between the evenings they shall eat flesh. Doesn't this sound exactly like Pesach? And in the morning they will be satisfied with bread. And they will know that I, Yahweh, am he's speaking to Moshe, am your God. At this point, he's not exactly claiming them. That's the word. Verse 13. And in the morning it came to pass, the quail ascended and covered the camp, and in the morning dew was lying around the camp. I read that wrong? And in the evening it came to pass, the quail ascended and covered the camp, and in the morning dew was lying around the camp. Oh, I said morning both times the first time? Okay, anyway, it's evening and morning. Even Ezra said, it is possible that the quail came from the direction of the sea. We know he is right because the quail still fly through that area via the sea each year at that time. So we know he is right. Rashi said that quail are a species of fat poultry. The only quail I have ever eaten was skinny, gamey, and scarce on the meat. Verse 14. The dew lying around ascended, and behold, on the face of the wilderness was fine flakes, fine as frost on the ground. So let's look at ascended, or going up. Rashi said that the dew evaporated. In other words, it went up because of the heat of the sun. In Bamidbar, which is Numbers 11:9, it says that the dew descended. As you can imagine, there are now volumes of books that attempt to make both verses correct instead of accepting that one of the verses is wrong. The Babylonian Talmud in Yoma 75b says that the dew was on top and bottom. In the end, it doesn't matter if the dew was below, above, or both. What matters is that the manna was there. However, because of the Talmud, the tradition of placing 2 loaves of bread, which represents the double portion, on top of a tablecloth, covered by another linen cloth on Shabbat, now exists. Now you know where that came from. Where it says fine frost, Rashi said that fine frost meant that it looked like powdered ice. Onkelos said it was like powdered chalk. It's just 2 different ways of describing something. It doesn't mean that one's right and one's wrong. Verse 15, and the children of Israel saw it and said, it says man to brother. Well, that's the Hebrew way of saying one to another. So they said to each other, Manhu, because they were speaking Hebrew, not English. And that's what they said, Manhu. Well, that literally means what if. We would say, what is it? And then it goes on and says, for they did not know what it was. And Moshe said, it is the lachem, it's halachem, it's the bread that Yahweh has given you to eat. If it's not clear here, you're looking at the text and it's not clear here, the text will eventually tell us that the children of Israel made bread, or cakes as it were, from that flour. Verse 16, these are the words that Yahweh commanded. These are the words that Yahweh commanded. This is past tense. Yahweh's already commanded. Gather it, speaking of the manna, to mouth eat it. Gather it, to mouth eat it. It's an idiom. Gather it as much as each man needs. To mouth eat it means as much as each man needs. Then it says, and omer. That's the Hebrew word at one time for measure. It's not a specific measurement. It's the Hebrew word for measure. So gather a measure for the total number of your souls. A man will take it into his tent. Since one place says the amount is supposed to be the amount needed by each person, and the other place says the amount is an omer, people argue that there is a mistake here. One man may be large and need more food, while another man may be small and need less. One family may have 20 people, the other family may only have 2. How then can an omer be enough for the big man or the big family and not too much for the little man and the little family? The mistake here is that people are trying to make an omer a specific measurement, instead of realizing that omer is the word for measure. In other words, a large measure for the large man and a small measure for the small man. Now, if you read on, you'll see that this makes sense. This does not mean that the word omer was never used for a specific amount. It simply means that it wasn't here. So verse 17, and thus the children of Israel did so, and some gathered much, and some gathered little. Even Ezra said that each person collected an amount proportionate to the size of his family. Verse 18, and they measured with an omer, with a measure, and nothing remained for he who gathered much, and nothing lacked for he who gathered little. They gathered man to mouth, eat ye. That's another idiom. as much as each man needed. They gathered as much as each man needed. That's the measure. And Omer is as much as each man needs in this case, because this is what the Omer is being tied to. Verse 19, and Moshe said to them, no man is to let it remain until morning. Even Ezra said that no one was commanded to eat the whole amount, but if they didn't, they were commanded to throw it away. He is correct. Verse 20, but they did not listen to Moshe, and I have in italics, some men let it remain until the morning, and it swelled up with worms and stunk, and Moshe was angry with them. So it's obviously it's some. Moshe didn't do it. Aharon probably didn't do it. Just some of them did it. Onkelos emphasized that men referred to here encompassed only certain men. Verse 21, and they gathered it in mourning in mourning. Literally, that's how it would translate. And they gathered it in mourning in mourning. So what did they do? And they gathered it every morning. It's an idiom. Then it says, manna's mouth eat they. What does that mean? As much as each man eat. Then it says, and it dissolved when the sun became hot. Evaporated is fine. Onkelos and Rashi said that the remainder of the manna that was not gathered melted, which makes sense. This verse is referring to the manna outside their tents melting, evaporating, not the manna inside, since it melted and did not grow worms and stinks. If it was in their house, it didn't melt, and it grew worms and it stunk. But if it was outside their house, it just evaporated. Verse 22, and it came to pass on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread. 2 omer, 2 measure, 2 1. 2 measures, 2 1. So twice as much. And they came, all the Nesiah of the Adah, of the congregation, and declared to Moshe. So they're declaring to Moshe that they've done what they were told. The sages argue that God reprimanded Moshe for not telling the people about the Shabbat until now. But it is more likely that the people are only just now wondering why they gather twice as much on Friday and what should they do with it when they do, because they've already found out that it turns to worms and stinks. So now they're thinking, wait a minute, why did we gather twice as much? And what are we supposed to do with it? Should we cook it? Are we supposed to keep it, let it turn to worms and stink? Right? This is what's happening. Pseudo said the following in his book, so I'm going to quote from it. A commentary, the book was called A Commentary on the Book of Exodus. Here's the quote. In the poetic tradition of Mesopotamia, which was certainly known to the patriarchs who immigrated from there, and similarly in the poetic tradition of the Canaanites, with which the patriarchs were undoubtedly familiar from the time that they settled in the land, every important work is described as being accomplished in the course of 6 days, and as attaining its completion or conclusion, or culminating in the emergence of a new and important situation on the 7th day. The Israelite tradition already depicted in this way the work of creation, 6 days of creative activity, and a 7th day of rest. On the basis of their knowledge of all of this, the Israelites could have understood such statements as are made here concerning the difference between the 7th day and the 6 preceding days, and regarding the sanctification of the and regarding the sanctification of the former to the Lord. The pseudo seem to be saying that the Israelites learned about the Shabbat from others, since others celebrated a 7th day. I think it is far more reasonable to believe that everyone learned the Shabbat from God's law in the very beginning. I believe that the tree of life is, in fact, the Torah. Thus, at the beginning of human existence, the law of Shabbat was known, and some people, including the Israelites, still followed it. Verse 23, and he, Moshe, said to them, it is that which Yahweh declared. So he's already declared it. Shabbat rest is holy to Yahweh. So the it here is the Shabbat rest. That which you bake, bake. And that which you boil, boil. And all that is left over, let it remain with you. Keep it until the morning. So there's something a little bit up in the air here. He's either telling them, cook it all on Friday, or cook what you need for Friday and leave that other stuff to sit overnight, which they already are a little worried about what's going to happen if they do that. So it is that which Yahweh declared. These words prove that Moshe had already spoken these words to the people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known what he was talking about here. So he's already told them. There's proof right in the text that he had already told them. So God is not going to reprimand him for not telling them when the text tells us that they knew. Verse 24. Wait a minute. Maybe I wanted to say something else here. Okay. It will make it clear before it's over. And they rested it until the morning as commanded by Moshe, and none of it stunk, neither were there any worms in it. So you cook what you need on Friday, you leave the flour overnight, and somehow this time it's not going to have worms, and this time it's not going to stink. Right there's the answer to which is which. Onkelos believed that all meals for Saturday had to be cooked on Friday. He obviously didn't catch what was being said here. Even Ezra, and I, of course, disagree with him on this one, because the two of us agree. The two of us agree with each other, but we disagree with Onkelos, because this proves that they cooked the food on Shabbat. It was flour powder here, not bread, man. Jeez. Get it? Flour powder. Anyway, why would it say, and none of it stunk? Neither were there any worms in it if it were pre-cooked. So yes, you can cook and prepare food on the Shabbat. 25. And Moshe said, they will eat of it this day, for this day is a Shabbat to Yahweh. This day they will not search for it in the field. The sages developed the tradition of eating 3 meals on Sabbath from the fact that this day was used 3 times in this sentence. That's where you get your 3 meals a day. It started here just on Shabbat, and then when advertisers came along, the next thing you know, we have 3 meals every day. Verse 20, and that's literally how that happened. Verse 26, 6 days you shall gather it, but in the 7th rest. There will be none in it. None, there will be no gathering in it, the Shabbat. Verse 27, and it came to pass in the 7th day, there went out to gather from the people. That means a portion taken from the whole, so that's some of the people. From the people, but they found none. In this verse is a subtle hint that God himself is Torah observant. The reason why there was no manna on the Shabbat is because God was resting on that day. Yes, the Torah is God's lifestyle, and we are supposed to imitate it. After all, we are made in his image. Verse 28, and Yahweh said to Moshe, how long, what he actually said was, until when? Literally. But that means, how long will you, he's talking to Moshe, how long will you, Moshe, refuse to keep my commandments and my Torah? Wait, didn't it say some of the people from among them went out? Moshe wasn't part of this. Well, in God's world, the leader is responsible for the sins of the people. There's a lot of arguments about why Moshe didn't get to go into the promised land. I think we have a hint here as to why he didn't get to go in. I think it wasn't because of his sin. I think it was because of the people's. Verse 29. Understand that Yahweh has given you the Shabbat. Therefore, bread is given to you on the 6th day. Man shall remain in his dwelling this day. Man shall not go out from his place on my Shabbat days. Rashi said that it is because of this verse that we are limited to a distance of 2,000 cubits. In other words, a Sabbath day's journey. You want to know how far a Sabbath day's journey is? Measure out 2,000 cubits, and there you'll have it. He went on to argue that the limit was a prohibition on gathering manna, not on leaving our homes. The Sadducees and the Karaites, who take the biblical text literally, understood the requirement to go to all Jews to all times. So to this day, they say you're not allowed to go outside your home on the Sabbath. Hebrew is not a literal language. The words do not have to appear in the text. And this verse assumes that we, like Rashi, will understand it. Here's my rendering of the verse that might help the literalist. Understand that Yahweh has given you the Shabbat. Therefore, bread is given to you on the sixth day. Man shall not go out to gather food this day. Man shall not go out from his place to gather food on my Shabbat days. In the end, whether people are commanded to stay in their tents on Shabbat or not to gather on the Shabbat, this law was only for the wilderness, since the wilderness is the only place and time when the food which was gathered fell from the sky in a double portion on Friday morning. The subject was going out to gather food, and that subject did not change. So Rashi's correct. You don't go out to gather food on the Shabbat. It wasn't about you couldn't go out of the tent. It was about you couldn't go out to gather food on the Shabbat. Verse 30, and the people rested on the Shabbat day. The people rested from what? We think they're all just laying around, drinking root beer and watching football, right? No. What did they rest from? They rested from gathering food. 31. And the house of Yisrael called the name of it Man. That's what we think of as manna. And it was like the God, not G-O-D. God, G-A-D. It's a Hebrew word. The closest we have for it in English is the English rendering of the Latin word coriander seed. For coriander is the Latin word. So it was like the coriander seed. White, it says, and it tasted like wafers of honey. It was like the coriander seed. Rashi said it was round like the seed, but unlike the seed, it was white. So you have to know that the coriander, or the God seed, G-A-D, not G-O-D, was white. The coriander was not white, but the seed, the manna, was. That's what he's trying to tell you. Now, it tasted like wafers with honey. You know there's a tradition in Judaism that says that the man, or we think of it as manna, from heaven tasted like whatever the Jews wanted to eat. If they wanted quail, all they had to do was imagine in their mind quail, and it tasted just like quail, which is, of course, why God had to send them real quail, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, does it? But if they wanted a pot pie, it will taste like pot pie. Well, there's a problem with that because the text says the wafers, or that the flour tasted like, once it was cooked, tasted like wafers with honey. Thus, it did not taste like whatever the Jews longed for. It tasted like wafers dipped with honey. Some argue that since it is described as tasting like cake baked with oil in Bamidbar, that's Numbers, if you don't know, 11:8, these are two different tastes. Not so much, people. Two different descriptions of the same taste does not two tastes make. I think the point was that even though their oil was old, the cake still tasted fresh in Bamidbar. Anyway, 32. And Moshe said, these are the words that Yahweh commanded. Fill your omer, fill your measure with it to keep to your generations, so that they will see that which I made you eat in the wilderness when I brought you out from the land of Mitzrayim. Verse 33. And Moshe said to Aharon, take one pot, that's the earthen vessel, and put there a full omer, put there a full measure of man, of the manna, and rest it before Yahweh. Put it in the presence of Yahweh, if you will, to keep to your generations. Moshe didn't say this until after the tabernacle was built. But this is not what the text says here. 34. According to the command Yahweh had given to Moshe, Aharon rested it before the congregation, the Yadah, to be kept. Much has been made about this verse since the tabernacle had not yet been built. Some say that this verse was taken from a later portion of the text and comes from some other document that was blended to Shemot or Exodus. Casuto and others have thoroughly put to rest the argument about several different documents being blended together. That turned out to be a bunch of nonsense. They're still teaching it to this day. But it's been proven by the best of scholars that it's nonsense. Others, including Casuto, attempt to make it a rabbinic writing style, which relays events out of chronological order, because they're still hung up on there was no tabernacle. How did he put it on the ark in the tabernacle? The issue, as I see it, is in people following after the vowel pointing, which was added much later in history. The word is not edut. It is adat, which are both spelled exactly the same way in Hebrew. Both words are, I already said that. Edut means ark, and adat means congregation. Thus, the vessel was placed where the people could see it. It was not placed in an ark that was not yet built. Now, that's where it wound up, but that's not where it was at the time. Verse 35. The children of Israel ate the manna, 40 years until they came to the land which was inhabited. They ate the man until they came to the edge of the land of Canaan, or Canaan. Verse 36. And the omer, the measure, is 1/10 of an ephah. Wait a minute. The omer is 1/10 of an ephah. It would seem that what Robert said about the omer being the word for measure is all wrong. But the subject here is the omer in the vessel before the people. That amount was 1/10 of an ephah. That means it was 3 1/2 liters or 6 1/2 pints. They're both the same measurement, by the way. Just one's in liters, one's in pints. Thus, the reason why people try so hard to place an exact amount to the word measure. Could you eat 6 1/2 pints of bread each day? I don't know how much that is. Should we try it? You might lose some weight. I'm just saying. No, it's talking about the measure that was put in that jar. This is the exact amount that was put in that jar. That's not the amount of an omer. That's the amount of that omer. All right. This concludes our walk through chapter 16. Shalom, Beshalom.